Let's get right into it, Teddy, here. NFL always on the mind. Wild card weekend starting up. You go from those full 1 through 17 week slates. Now you enter into the playoffs here. And there's always questions that pop up on what's the right thing to do once we get into the playoff series. Now, looking at the games coming up, a couple teams did some interesting things in games that technically didn't mean much on paper. But as Herm Edwards says, Teddy, you play to win the game. 3 teams I want to talk about here who played to win the game: the Chicago Bears, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Cowboys. With way it turned out, nothing to play for, but put their starters out there for the majority of the games. All 3 of those teams won their games, and me as an Eagles fan, Teddy, I can't be more appreciative of those Chicago Bears. Your thoughts on playing with momentum heading into the playoffs?
Irrelevant. The bottom line is you're going to see all kinds of trends and angles, all kinds of, oh, they've got momentum, oh, they stunk down the stretch. When you actually break down the numbers, both historically and in recent seasons for the NFL wildcard, winning a Week 17 game has basically no impact on what happens the following week. So we saw the Bears go balls to the wall and knock out Minnesota. We saw the Cowboys in a unique situation against the Giants where, rallying from behind, going for 2 at the end of the game to steal it, exerting a lot of energy and effort in doing so. And, of course, Seattle, it wasn't a pretty game for the Seahawks. They found a way to win, never sniffed a point spread cover, didn't play particularly well in their season finale. I certainly wouldn't call the Seahawks going balls to the wall. They found a way to win. Dallas is the one of those 3 teams that if there's legitimate momentum factor, the Cowboys should have a little bit of momentum because that was an exhilarating come-from-behind win against the Giants. The other 2, a little bit less exhilarating in that regard.
No, I agree with you there because when you look at it from a Chicago Bears perspective, it was, 10-point line coming in with the LA Rams. You figured they would put away the San Francisco 49ers, which they did, but still playing in the second half. Did get one of the wide receivers banged up a little bit, but they are a younger team, younger head coach, younger team moving forward. But typically out of that Andy Reid tree, Teddy, that we've seen over the past couple of years, he is a big proponent of resting before getting into the playoffs. Now you're going to come in the Soldier Field against the Philadelphia Eagles, who also obviously had to play their starters to get into the playoffs because they absolutely needed to win. Getting back to the Seahawks there, isn't that a Pete Carroll mindset here, Teddy, that we always look about? You see in the preseason, one of the teams I always know, I don't really bet preseason football, but I know a lot of people angle in on Pete Carroll with this whole competition at all times. It does matter what's on the scoreboard. I thought that was an interesting one now plowing into the Cowboys. The one thing I did agree with the Cowboys is I know they took it lightly a couple years ago when they went into the playoffs, rested guys up, and ended up getting knocked out early. So they wanted to sort of change up that momentum, keep Zach Martin out, get him a little bit fresher there. But the one thing I did agree with is Zeke Elliott touched the ball a lot down the stretch. That 1 week breather to give him a deep breath before they come home, I thought that played in really well. I was actually surprised they played and won that game because I was figuring that, Dak Prescott would sort of tap out in that game in the second half, but they played it right down to the bones. But to me, I think I agree with your initial point. Momentum, same thing we say in baseball, only goes as far as your starting pitcher takes you the next day. I agree with it. Health is the biggest concern for me heading into the playoffs. But it looks like neither one of these teams really got anybody seriously injured in that last game.
Well, there's a lot of injuries to talk about. And when it comes to wild card weekend, and a lot of guys questionable. These are injuries you probably want to pay attention to over the course of the next couple of days because every player we're going to talk about here, an impact player. Let's start with the Texans and Jonathan Joseph. You want to talk about a cornerback who they absolutely need to have healthy on the field against Indy and against T.Y. Hilton, who has absolutely owned that team. Jonathan Joseph, he's questionable with a neck injury. For Indy, Ryan Kelly, questionable as well. Talk about your starting center for a quarterback who has avoided getting sacked this year. That's Andrew Luck. What do you go, 5 straight games without a sack for the season? He wasn't pounded the way that he had been in years past. And if you're looking for one reason why Indy is where they are, that offensive line, that Ryan Kelly injury, to me, a significant one, he's listed right now as questionable.
No, I agree with you, Teddy, because when you look at that injury there, what do you want to stop if you're going to go up against a defense that's, a pass rushing menace as the Houston Texans? You want the fullest, healthiest offensive line you can have. Very good performance, even though last week without Ryan Kelly against a pretty formidable front with the Tennessee Titans. That's going to help them moving forward. But you're also right. The Jonathan Joseph injury is key because when you were looking even going a little bit farther back, Teddy, to the Houston game where they played the Philadelphia Eagles, lost 3 cornerbacks in that football game, got one back last week, but also had one put on IR. He's going to be a key proponent moving forward. The other interesting one, Ted, I do want to talk to you about because we've heard so much about this of the season. torn ACL for Hunter Henry in the offseason. Now looks like he's eligible to play, coming back off the IR. How effective can he be, Teddy, coming back in this game?
He could potentially be very effective for the Chargers in this contest. Remember, Hunter Henry was a guy playing at a Pro Bowl level, and he was a guy who was expected to be instrumental in that offense. If they're bringing him off IR here, it means he's had time to acclimate, and they're expecting something out of a guy with Pro Bowl talent. So can he be a difference maker for the Chargers? You bet he can. It's not like Phillip Rivers lacks targets, but the more downfield weapons you have, the better chance you have of beating the Baltimore Ravens. Of course, the Chargers also become the first team to face Lamar Jackson twice. It's a very unique Baltimore offense right now, and seeing it a second time could give defenses a bit of an edge, especially after they were embarrassed at home by that Ravens team just 2 weeks ago.
Absolutely. And the last one there, obviously the key injury to Nick Foles, which Eagles, dodging a little bit of a bullet here. Look, if I want my quarterback banged up a little bit, probably the last team I want to go into and play is the Chicago Bears with that ferocious pass rush. Eagles have a very good pass rush blocking offensive line, so we'll see how that one tilts out. Teddy, some other NFL news here, which doesn't seem to ever end. And we're talking about, the Kardashians of the NFL, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Le'Veon Bell last year came and did what he wanted, sent into exile. I don't want to sign my franchise tag. You give a lot of money to Antonio Brown. He has over 100 catches, but Juju Smith-Schuster may be having the better year, throwing footballs at your quarterback, making up stories about knee injuries here. Teddy, the Pittsburgh Steelers, after starting slow, getting hot, then fading fast, the future of this team with Antonio Brown, never a dull moment there.
No, and look, I think that Pittsburgh as a franchise and as an organization, obviously, they've been overshadowed by what's happened in New England over the course of the last, 2 decades. But, of course, the Patriots get to play in a division with 3 literally inept franchises with them, which is a huge part of New England's success over the course of the last 2 decades. They get to play against the Jets and the Dolphins and the Bills, all 3 of whom have had dismal organizations for decades. Pittsburgh, playing in a division with Baltimore with a good organization, and since he's had good teams in recent years, they haven't had it as easy. But the most incredible stat on this Steelers team, all right, we talk about all these division titles for the Patriots in a weak division. The Steelers have been in every year of the Ben Roethlisberger, Mike Tomlin era, every single season since Roethlisberger and Tomlin got there. They've either made the playoffs or missed the playoffs by 1 game. No rebuilding seasons, no down years, just consistency. And no, only won what they have, 2 rings for Big Ben in his career. But when we look at Pittsburgh moving forward and we say, all right, this has been an incredible run. They haven't missed the playoffs by more than a game in more than a decade. And we say now we have an aging quarterback. We have constant drama and constant. I mean, it hasn't ended at any point over the last decade plus for Pittsburgh. It's just the way that it is for the Steelers. But you grade out the roster. You look at next year, you say they should be right there. When you start talking about dumping Pro Bowlers like Antonio Brown, what's that, $21 million in dead cap money for Pittsburgh? And he's not someone you're going to replace right away. Why is Schuster so effective? Because he's got Brown on the other side. Look at the teams that traded away their key receivers this year. The Demaryius Thomas of the world. How'd Denver fare after they traded him away? How'd the Lions fare after they traded Golden Tate away? When you have an A-plus level receiver, you do everything you can to keep him happy and in the fold. If Pittsburgh dumps Antonio Brown, they will miss him, and they will not make the playoffs next year.
Yeah, one of the few teams, Teddy, that's drafted really well at wide receiver over the years. We saw Santonio Holmes, they let him go due to some quote-unquote issues to the New York Jets, and obviously Mike Wallace let him go as a free agent. Just seems like they can replenish and replace, but you're right. You should love to work in tandem. You have 2 dominant wide receivers, and you're right. With the other teams going away with Golden Tate injury, Golden Tate being traded to Philadelphia and also Demaryius Thomas being traded away and then getting injured for the Texans, you're already depleting your lineup. And look how those teams fared. Emmanuel Sanders goes down with a tear. Now you're really depleted. And then you also look at the Detroit Lions as they head down the stretch. Marvin Jones also getting hurt. So not only do you take away a talented player, but you deplete that overall depth of the organization. The one team that seems to be able to draft well continuously are the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they're in no business of just saying, you know what, let's just trade away this talent or cut this talent and give up $21 million, as you said, in dead money. That just doesn't make very many smart business sense moves. And also, I remember last year, Teddy, the whole fiasco where they're heading into some games and Antonio Brown's FaceTiming during Mike Tomlin's speech about, I believe it was maybe the New England Patriots that he was talking about at the time. So never a dull moment for the Steelers, but just because you have some divas on the team, you need those divas to win some football games here in the NFL. So I do agree with you there. Dumb move if you do want to move on for Antonio Brown, a superior talent, and you're going to get hit with that cap space. Teddy, yesterday was a big bowl day. Yesterday, Urban Meyer left as one of the most accomplished coaches in NCAA history. But for me, he left and didn't put any money in my pocket, Teddy, because I was sitting on a -6 number for my Ohio State Buckeyes and feeling really good about it late second half. An ultimate collapse there. What a game. Crazy coaches' decisions, even crazier execution of those coaching decisions. Teddy, a wild Rose Bowl yesterday.
Yeah, but we got to talk about the point spread. Forget the game. All right, the game was an interesting game. I'm going to call this probably the worst bad beat of bowl season this year. If you laid with Ohio State. That was a completely dominant performance from the Buckeyes. And at 28-3, Urban Meyer calls the dogs off. And next thing you know, Jake Browning, of all players, leading the backdoor drive and then another backdoor drive. And next thing you know, they end up winning by only 5. Now, of course, the mainstream media, huge middle. Game. Nobody who bet Ohio, I shouldn't say that nobody. 99.9% of the people that bet Ohio State lost that game. All right. There was probably 0.1% that either bet it very, very early or very, very late and got a -4.5 in their pocket or a -5 to push. 99% of people lost with Ohio State. So, yeah, it ended up landing in the middle. No, it didn't. It was a brutal bad beat for Buckeye backers as the Huskies come in through the back door.
I mean, Teddy, let's go through, because again, I like to relive the bad beats worse than the ones that I don't deserve to win games. So let's take a look at the end of the football game. Forget about Ohio State can't get a first down and they're throwing the football all over the place and can't get out of their own way. It came down to a major decision from Chris Peterson. I believe he's on his own 20-yard line with a 4th and 8 with about 3.5 minutes to go and only has 2 timeouts. Teddy, he punted the football. I got up out of my chair and said, there's one for the good guys. He actually punted the ball, 1 first down, salted away, but this game is pretty much over. But did he know a little bit more than we did, and did he appease his backers, or should I say his boosters at Washington with that punt, saying, they'll go 3 and out, and we'll score the meaningless touchdown and have no chance to win the football game? I can't believe that decision actually worked out in bettor's favors, that he punted that football. Amazing.
Well, on the other hand, it worked. I mean, when you look at from a straight up standpoint, it didn't matter. All right. And from a thought process, if we're going to try to win this game, we got to go for it on 4th down. We'll punt it away. That means we're basically waving the white flag, which is kind of what Peterson did in that contest. But it wasn't a wave the white flag, because now you're live for the last drive and live, in theory, for a miracle at the end of the ballgame. I mean, you consider what Washington's defense did to Ohio State after Ohio State had, shot their load and done what they're going to do and put up the 4 touchdowns. They didn't really move the football down the stretch. And, of course, what's the strength of that Washington team all year was the defense. So the fact that Peterson relied on that defense and ended up cashing a ticket as a result, I mean, say it is what it is. Brutal beat for Buckeye backers. But this is the key point. You're saying, did the coach know? Is he worried he'd make it one for the alumni? No, I'm not buying that. I don't believe that coaches are all that concerned about covering point spreads as underdogs when they don't win the game. And I think that's the case for Peterson. I don't think he cared one iota if he covered the number or not. He was just trying to get his team to compete through the final gun, which is exactly what they did.
Exactly. I mean, a Mike Vick effort on that last drive by Jake Browning, escaping tackles, avoiding sacks on 2nd and long, which would have turned into 3rd and 18s or 19s, throwing it underhanded, throwing lob balls, and wide receivers reincarnating into Odell Beckham Jr. out of nowhere. We had everything down the stretch there. But, hey, it's going to keep you involved, and we always like to talk about those beats.